Greetings! Welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel. And this is going to be a short little video. I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about how we handle our maple sap. There have been a couple of videos at this point about making spiles and collecting sap with free equipment. We are just using a couple of, I have 4 taps in total, and we're just using milk jugs for this year. It is my intent to upgrade that equipment in the future, but this year it's just kind of, to keep it simple, little bit of free handy equipment for this year. I'm hoping to do a build along at some point on making a full-blown boiler, and then we will go big on buckets and invest in the equipment once we can handle it. But my 4 taps are giving me as much sap as I can handle for our little top of the stove boiling setup, right? So it's pointless to go big on equipment until I have the ability to handle it on the downstream end. Now what we are doing is taking all of our sap and cooking it into dry, nice fluffy dry maple brown sugar. Okay, you can see it's nice and loose, easy to handle. The reason for this is because you can still use it for syrup. You can get any simple syrup or simple syrup, light syrup, heavy syrup recipe that you want. And you can take the brown sugar and in a very controlled way bring it back to syrup for your pancakes or for canning something else or for whatever you want to do with it. You can also use it interchangeably with brown sugar in any recipe where you have brown sugar as a sweetener, and it will introduce the maple undertone instead of the molasses undertone that comes with brown sugar. So it's a more versatile product, and even more importantly, this is the smallest space in which you can store it, and it needs no additional preservation. Does not need canned, does not need refrigerated. That's just a unsealed, heavy lid to keep stuff out, but unsealed canister, and it will just sit at room temperature forever in that form. So this is going back to the old days, back before there were canning jars and you had to hunt and scrape and scrounge and pay loads of money for canning jar lids, right? There was a day before canning jars where people still preserved food, and they did it by drying. So we are going all the way to the fully dry form. Now, if you start to look up recipes for this, you're gonna hear about, sugar testing equipment and candy thermometers and all of that sort of stuff, but you really don't need all of that. Again, there was a day where people boiled maple sap for thousands of years without candy thermometers, right? Doing it by eye and just watching and observing and paying attention to what's going on. So first we have rough removal of the water in the large pots in the back. And then we have boiling it down to the sugar. Now, when you're doing this, the thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to have a single pot into which everything goes and then you keep adding more sap and more sap and more sap and more sap. Because you're diluting your sap faster than you're boiling it down to sugar. That's counterproductive. So we have 3 pots. Why do we have 3 pots? Because that's what fits on top of our stove. And when I have fresh sap, and I have just the strainer, hon. Thank you. It always goes into the pot right on the end. And bugs will try to get into this, and I saw some ants here this morning when I was getting this off the trees. So I'm just pouring it through a strainer. Okay? Fresh sap always goes in the one on the far right. Set that down. And then when the middle one is empty, I fill it from this one. When the one on the far end is empty, I fill it from the middle one. Okay? So when this needs sap, when this needs more sap in it, I will fill it from the middle, cycle all the way down through, and then put fresh sap in here. Okay? When I've boiled this down a time or two and it's ready to take the sugar, then I go from here into one of these pans. Now, once it goes into the shallow pan, I will not refill this. I will cook this all the way down, and if I need to pull more sap out of here, I will get another empty pan. Okay? So this boils down, and you can leave it on direct heat until it starts to get a little bit of a sheen on top. You start to see some sugar crystals coming on top. Once you start to see some sugar crystals coming on top, it gets very easy to burn. So you want to put it up on a trivet. My favorite trivets are these soapstones. You see these in antique shops all the time, at least here in the north you see them in antique shops all the time. And these were historically used. People would put them on top of their wood stoves and heat them up and then put them in their beds so they didn't have to crawl into cold bed sheets. But soapstone is kind of unique. Soapstone is kind of unique because it gains heat. It will store a lot of heat, but it's also a good insulator. So it stores a lot of heat, but it gains it slowly and it releases it slowly. So it moderates the flow of heat and prevents things from overheating. This is how you simmer, right? If you want to talk about traditional cooking, soapstone is how you simmer. Other types of rock you can boil with, and putting directly on top of a stove, you're just talking about boiling. Soapstone is how you simmer. Before there were crock pots, there were soapstones, right? So once it starts to get some sugar crackling around the top, if you take it off at that point, you'll have a taffy type material, okay? But you want to take it off from there and put it on the soapstone. And now you want to cook it. Is this in frame, hon? Up a little? Good? Okay. You want to cook it until you see you have all the sugar. If I poke through, you can see there's still some liquid in there. Right? There's still a little liquid. But I have about, by volume, I have about half of it all the way crispy hard, and about half has some liquid in it. Brown sugar needs to have some liquid in it to stay fluffy. Right? So when you hit this stage, take your fork and push all of the crystals down into the liquid from the edge of the pan. Okay, well, it's still warm. Then crush them up real good. Okay. What we have in this taffy-like stuff is a supersaturated solution. Now, if you just take that supersaturated solution and let it cool, again, you'll get taffy. Because you don't have condensation nuclei, or I should say nucleation center is a little more accurate, for the rest of the sugar in here to crystallize out as a solid. So that's what gives you your taffy. That's why if you let it cook until you just have a little bit of a sheen on top and then let it harden, you're at the taffy stage. But if you let it develop half all the way hard sugar crystals, and then you punch them down in, all of those existing sugar crystals, they can't redissolve because it's a supersaturated solution. And now as it cools, you've given it all of these nucleation sites, and all of the rest of the sugar, instead of coming out as a taffy, will go all the way to solid crystals as it cools. Okay? And then, when this is cool, you can see I've just smushed it up so it's a nice even. Is this a frame? Okay. So, I smushed it up so it's a nice even consistency here. This, as it cools, will harden. And then you can again take your fork and just kind of chop it up a little again. And you'll have a couple of hard clumps here and there, but for the most part, that will smush up into a nice loose brown sugar. Okay? And then this will join all of its friends in my jar, and I can then come and refill this pan from this. Put this one up on the trivets, and then this one down on for quick reduction of the liquid. Okay, so that's how we handle our maple sugar. And again, some people say, well, why don't you want the syrup? And I do want the syrup, but now I can just make my syrup a cup at a time, just from any heavy syrup recipe from the sugar crystals. And if I want not syrup, if I want to cook with it as sugar, like, make some maple syrup, maple snickerdoodles, or maple donut frosting, or anything like that. You just take any sugar recipe and you use this and you get your maple flavor. So it's more versatile, takes a smaller space, and you don't need additional preservation. So those are the advantages to it. And like you can see, I'm doing this without any fancy equipment. Okay, you don't. Soapstone trivets are not the only way to use it. To get a trivet, you can get any trivet and do this. Soapstone is just my favorite. So anyhow, I hope this is useful. I hope that you will go and make some maple sugar. And if you're not in a maple area, I hope that you will think about what sugar plants do you have in your area. If you're in the tropics, think about palms. If you're and sugarcane, you can do this exact same process with sugarcane juice. If you're somewhere in the temperate region where you don't have maple trees growing, think sugar beets. If you're in the southern United States, think about other sugar trees, like some of your nut trees can be sugared. Birch trees can be sugared. You don't get as good a yield. It's much waterier than the sugar maple, but there are other plants that can be sugared. So I hope this gives you some ideas. I hope that you're excited about going and getting some calories from your family that have additional stuff in them beyond just pure white sugar. And I hope that you will join us next time on Old Boys Rising Farm.